I'm 78 years old now, my hands spotted with age and trembling as I write these words in my room at Sunset Manor. The Kansas wheat fields outside my window stretch endlessly toward the horizon, just like they did 70 years ago when my nightmare began. Some memories fade with time, like old photographs left in the sun, but others remain sharp as broken glass, cutting fresh wounds each time you handle them. It was August 1952, and I was 8 years old, standing barefoot in our kitchen while Pa crashed through the door at 2 in the afternoon. The smell hit me first corn whiskey, mixed with the sour stench of failure that seemed to follow him everywhere that summer. "Emily Rose Walsh, get your scrawny hide over here right now." Pa snarled his overalls stained with mud from the dried creek bed where our cattle used to drink before the drought killed them all. I knew that tone. It meant someone had to pay for whatever fresh disaster had befallen our failing farm, and since Ma was too sick to bear another beating, that someone would be me. I backed toward the corner where Ma's sewing basket sat, overflowing with patches cut from clothes we could no longer afford to replace. "I didn't do nothing wrong, Pa," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the wind rattling our loose window frames. "Don't you sass me, girl." His leather belt, the one with the brass buckle that left the worst marks, whistled through the air before I could dodge. The metal caught my shoulder blade, tearing through my cotton dress and into the skin beneath. But I'd learned not to cry out. Crying only made Pa angrier, made his belt swing harder and longer. "Bank sent another letter today," he growled between strikes. "They're taking the north 40 acres next month. 40 acres of good farmland gone because we can't make the payments." 12 lashes that afternoon, each one drawing blood through my torn dress. When Pa finally stumbled toward his cot to sleep off the whiskey, I crawled behind Ma's rocking chair and pressed my face against the rough wooden wall. Ma knelt beside me with a damp cloth, her own left arm hanging at an odd angle from where Pa had grabbed and twisted it the week before. "Shh, baby girl," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the cough that had been getting worse all summer. "Don't let his poison words sink into your heart. You're worth more than he knows, more than any of us know right now." That night, lying on my straw mattress and listening to Pa's drunken snores mixing with Ma's labored breathing, I stared at the water-stained ceiling and made myself a promise. Someday, I would be strong enough to protect Ma from his fists. Someday, I would find a way out of this hell for both of us. I was 8 years old and already planning my escape. I just didn't know the path would lead through an even darker hell first. By 1954, when I turned 10, our farm had withered to barely 8 acres of stubborn soil that produced more tumbleweeds than crops. The Great Plains drought had stretched into its 3rd merciless year, and our neighbors' cattle were dropping dead in the fields, their bones bleaching white under the Kansas sun that seemed determined to burn every living thing to ash. School became my sanctuary. Miss Patterson, our teacher, was a spinster woman in her 50s who'd grown up poor herself during the previous generation's hard times. She had a way of making sure the hungriest children got extra attention and extra food. "Emily, you paying attention to this arithmetic lesson?" she asked one October morning when I'd been staring out the schoolhouse window at the children from prosperous farms. Kids like Sarah Mitchell, whose father's wheat somehow survived when everyone else's crops failed. "Yes, ma'am," I lied, turning back to the blackboard. 7 times 8 equals 56. "Correct?" Miss Patterson's voice carried the kind of warmth I never heard at home. "Emily, would you help me clean erasers after school today? I might have a sandwich that needs eating." That ham sandwich, thick slices of meat between fresh bread with real butter, was more food than I'd eaten in 2 days. But Miss Patterson's kindness meant more than the meal. She was living proof that not all adults were like Pa, that somewhere in the world existed grown-ups who protected children instead of hurting them. The real change came in spring 1955 when Sarah Mitchell convinced me to try out for the girls' softball team. Sarah was 13 to my 11, with honey-colored braids and clothes that actually fit her growing body. Her family owned the most successful wheat farm in 3 counties, and she moved through the world with the confidence that comes from never wondering where your next meal will come from. "Come on, Emily," she said one afternoon as we walked the gravel road after school. "Coach Harlan says he needs fast players for next season. You're the fastest runner I've ever seen. When you run, it looks like you're flying away from something." She wasn't wrong about the flying away part. Running had become my escape from everything Pa's fists. Ma's coughing fits that left blood on her handkerchief. The constant gnawing hunger that made my stomach feel hollow and aching. "I don't know if Pa would approve," I said, kicking at loose stones. "He says girls playing sports is foolishness. Says it gives us ideas above our station." "My pa used to say the same thing." Sarah laughed a sound like silver bells in summer wind. "But then he saw how happy it made me and he changed his tune. Besides, team members earn $2 for every game we win. That's real money, Emily. $2 might as well have been $200 to our family. Ma's tuberculosis was getting worse. Everyone could see it, though. Nobody spoke the word aloud, and Pa's drinking meant most of our money went to Murphy's Tavern instead of medicine or food." The tryouts were held on a Saturday morning in May when the air smelled of fresh grass and distant rain clouds promised relief from the drought. For the first time in months, I felt something that might have been hope stirring in my chest. Coach Thomas Harlan stood behind home plate like a monument to masculine authority, 6'3", built like a barn door, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from years of respect in our small community. At 43, he'd been coaching girls' softball for 6 years, and parents trusted him with their daughters the way they trusted the preacher with their souls. "All right, girls," he called out in his deep voice that carried across the field without effort. "Let's see what you're made of. Line up for the 50-yard dash, and remember, I'm not looking for the prettiest runners. I'm looking for the fastest." I'd never run competitively before, but desperation had taught my legs speed that coaches spend years trying to develop in other girls. When Coach Harlan clicked his stopwatch after my sprint, his thick eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. "Emily Walsh, right?" He consulted his clipboard with the careful attention of a man who never forgot important details. "That's the fastest time I've recorded in 6 years of coaching this team. Where'd you learn to run like that, young lady?" "Nowhere special, sir," I said, staring at his leather boots that probably cost more than our family spent on food in a month. "Well, wherever you learned it, you're on this team now," he said, and his smile made something warm and unfamiliar bloom in my chest. "Practice starts Monday after school. Don't disappoint me, Emily. I have a feeling you're going to be something special." Walking home with Sarah, I felt like I was floating above the dusty road. For the first time in my 11 years, an adult had called me special. Not worthless, not a burden, not a mistake special. "See?" Sarah said, swinging her canvas equipment bag with satisfaction. "I told you Coach Harlan was wonderful. My older sister played for him 3 years ago before she graduated. She always said he cared about his girls like they were his own daughters, like he'd protect us from anything that tried to hurt us." That evening, I told Ma about making the team while she sat on our sagging front porch watching the sunset paint the wheat fields amber and gold. Her hand, when she took mine, felt like bird bones wrapped in tissue paper. "That's wonderful, honey," she said, though talking made her cough. "You deserve some happiness in your life. You deserve to feel special." "Pa won't like it," I said. "You know how he gets about things that make him think I'm getting above myself? Your pa doesn't like much of anything these days." Ma replied, her expression hardening in a way I rarely saw. "But this is good for you, Emily. This is your chance to be more than what this place wants to make you. Don't let him or anyone else take it away from you." When Pa came home that night, stumbling through the door well past midnight, reeking of cheap whiskey and cigarette smoke, I pretended to be asleep. But I could hear him and Ma arguing in the kitchen, their voices sharp with the kind of exhaustion that comes from years of fighting the same battles without ever winning. Team sports for girls is goddamn foolishness. Pa slurred his words, running together like spilled water. Makes them think they're as good as men, gives them ideas about their place in the world. She's just a child, Frank, Ma said quietly. Let her have this one thing that makes her happy. One thing leads to another, Margaret. Mark my words, no good will come of this. Girls who play sports end up thinking they can do men's work, thinking they don't need husbands to take care of them. It's unnatural. But I didn't care what Pa thought. For the first time in my life, I had something that belonged to me alone, something that made me feel valuable, instead of worthless, wanted, instead of merely tolerated. I had no way of knowing that Coach Harlan's fatherly attention would soon become the darkest chapter of my childhood. Some monsters, I would learn, wear the faces of the people we trust most. The nightmare began on a Tuesday evening in September 1956, when I was 12 years old, and the Kansas heat still pressed down on our practice field, like the weight of God's disappointed hand. We'd been running drills for 2 hours base running until our legs shook fielding practice, until our gloves were black with sweat batting, until our arms ached from the repeated swings. One by one, my teammates had trudged home to their suppers and homework, their voices growing fainter as they called goodbyes across the empty field. Sarah had left 20 minutes earlier with her mother, who'd come to collect her in their gleaming blue Buick that looked like something from a magazine. Emily, hold up a minute, Coach Harlan called as I shouldered my worn canvas equipment bag. I want to work with you on your swing. You've got natural talent, but your technique needs fine-tuning. The field was empty now, except for the two of us, and the long shadows creeping across the packed dirt like dark fingers reaching for something they couldn't quite grasp. Coach, I really should get home, I said, adjusting my bag higher on my shoulder. Ma's expecting me to help with supper preparations. This was mostly a lie. We rarely had enough food for a proper supper, and Ma was usually too weak from her coughing fits to do much cooking. But it seemed like the kind of excuse adults expected from children. This won't take long, Coach Harlan said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of authority I'd learned never to question. Emily, do you want to be ordinary? Do you want to spend your whole life being just another poor farm girl who never amounts to anything? The question hit me like a physical blow. Of course, I didn't want to be ordinary. More than anything, I wanted to be somebody who mattered, somebody with value, in a world that seemed determined to convince me I was worthless. No, sir, I said. I want to be special. Good. That's what separates champions from quitters, the willingness to put in extra work when everyone else has gone home to their comfortable lives. He gestured toward the equipment shed behind the bleachers. I've got some specialized training materials in there that'll help you understand what it really means to be part of an elite team. The equipment shed was a windowless concrete building that stayed cool even in the brutal Kansas summers. Coach Harlan produced a key from his pocket, a key I'd never noticed before, and unlocked the heavy door with the careful precision of someone performing a familiar ritual. After you, he said, gesturing for me to enter first. Inside, the air smelled of leather gloves and pine tar, mixed with something else I couldn't identify, something musky and adult that made my stomach flutter with nameless unease. Baseball bats hung on wall pegs like sleeping weapons, boxes of balls sat stacked in corners, and the team's spare uniforms dangled from hooks like empty ghost girls. Close the door behind you, Coach Harlan said, moving deeper into the shed. We don't want any distractions from what we're doing here. The door shut with a solid thunk that seemed to echo forever in the confined space. The only light came from a bare bulb overhead, casting harsh shadows that made Coach Harlan's familiar features look strange and threatening. Now, Emily, he said, turning to face me. Let's have an honest conversation about what it really means to be special. What it takes to rise above your circumstances and become something more than the poverty you were born into. Something in his voice had changed. The fatherly warmth I'd grown to cherish was gone, replaced by something cold and predatory that made my skin crawl as if insects were walking across it. "I don't understand, Coach," I said, taking an instinctive step backward until my shoulders hit the closed door. "Oh, I think you do." He moved closer, close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath and see the dark hair curling above his shirt collar. "You're a smart girl, Emily. Smarter than most of these farm kids who'll never leave this county. You understand that this team is your only chance at a better life." "Yes, sir," I whispered. "And you understand that I'm the one who decides who stays on the team and who gets cut, who succeeds and who fails, who becomes somebody important and who remains nobody at all." My mouth went dry as cotton bolls. The air in the shed felt thick and hard to breathe. "Yes, sir." "Good. Then you understand that keeping me happy, really, truly happy, is the most important thing you can do for your future and your family's survival." He reached out and touched my cheek with one massive hand, his thumb tracing my jawline in a way that made every nerve in my body scream danger. I tried to pull away, but there was nowhere to go. "Coach, I don't think this is—" "Shh." His hand moved to cover my mouth, pressing hard enough to make my teeth cut into my lips. "Good girls don't question their coach, Emily. They listen, they obey, they do whatever it takes to help their team succeed." With his free hand, he began unbuttoning his shirt, revealing a chest covered in coarse, dark hair. My eyes went wide with terror as I realized what was about to happen, what he intended to do to me in this concrete tomb. I tried to scream, but his palm muffled the sound. I tried to run, but he grabbed my arm with crushing strength, his fingers digging into my thin bicep, hard enough to leave bruises that would last for weeks. "This is what champions do," he said, his voice calm and matter-of-fact, as if he were explaining a batting technique. "This is what separates the special girls from the ordinary ones. Are you special, Emily?" I couldn't answer with his hand covering my mouth, but tears were streaming down my cheeks, soaking into his palm and making the skin slippery. "I thought so," he said. "Now I'm going to take my hand away, and you're going to be very quiet about this. If you scream, if you fight me, if you tell anyone what happens in this shed, I'll cut you from the team tonight. Your family will lose that game money you desperately need, and you'll go back to being just another worthless girl from a worthless family. Do you understand me?" Paralyzed with terror, I nodded. His threat wasn't empty without the team. Without those precious $2 per game, my family would starve. Pa was drinking away what little money we had. Ma was too sick to work, and I was our only source of income. What happened next lasted an eternity and was over in minutes. The pain was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, worse than Pa's worst beatings, worse than the hunger that gnawed at my belly every night, worse than watching Ma cough blood into her handkerchief. It felt like being split in half, like dying, while being forced to remain conscious and aware. When it was over, I lay curled on the cold concrete floor in a pool of my own blood. My clothes torn and scattered around me like the fragments of my childhood innocence. Coach Harlan straightened his shirt and pants with casual efficiency, as if nothing significant had happened. "Clean yourself up," he said, tossing me a dirty rag from his equipment box. "And remember, this stays between us. If you tell anyone at all, I'll destroy you and your entire family. The sheriff won't believe a lying little slut over a respected community leader. Your parents will throw you out for bringing shame on the family name. You'll have nothing and no one." He unlocked the door and stepped out into the dying light of evening, leaving me alone with the smell of my own blood and the taste of betrayal in my mouth. "Practice tomorrow at 4 sharp." he called back casually. Don't be late. We've got a lot more work to do on your technique. I don't remember getting dressed or walking home through the twilight. I only remember lying on my straw mattress that night, staring at the water-stained ceiling and understanding that my life had changed forever. The monster wearing Coach Harlan's face had stolen something from me that could never be returned. And the worst part was I had to pretend it had never happened at all. By the spring of 1957, when I turned 13, Coach Harlan had developed what he called my advanced training program, a systematic schedule of abuse that occurred every Tuesday and Friday after regular practice. Each assault was different from the last, a carefully orchestrated descent into hell that showed me new ways a person could be broken. The second time, he took me to his office in the school building, claiming I needed to review game strategy on the blackboard. The janitor was gone for the day, and Coach Harlan had keys to every door. He bent me over his desk, while explaining batting averages, his voice never changing tone, even as he destroyed me, piece by piece. When a teacher's footsteps echoed in the hallway, he simply adjusted his position and continued the lesson until they passed. The third time, during a thunderstorm that knocked out power across half the county, he cornered me in the school basement where we'd taken shelter. With lightning illuminating the small windows and rain hammering the building above us, he whispered that the storm was like what he felt for me: wild, uncontrollable, natural. The other girls huddled together in the darkness, playing word games to pass the time, while 10 feet away their trusted coach committed crimes that had no names in my 12-year-old vocabulary. Each assault left me weaker in different ways. My body was breaking down under the trauma. Dark circles shadowed my eyes from sleepless nights, and I'd lost so much weight that my uniform hung on me like a scarecrow's clothes. But worse than the physical damage was the psychological erosion, the way each encounter carved away another piece of who I used to be. During games, I moved like an old woman, my reactions slow and painful. Simple catches became impossible when my hands shook uncontrollably. My batting average plummeted as I flinched away from every pitch, my body expecting pain, even in situations where none was intended. "Emily, what in the Sam Hill is wrong with you lately?" Sarah asked one afternoon as we walked home from a particularly disastrous practice. I'd dropped 3 easy fly balls and struck out twice during batting drills. "You used to be the best player on the team. Now you look like you're afraid of your own shadow." "Nothing's wrong," I lied, tugging at my long sleeves to hide the fingerprint bruises that ringed my arms like dark jewelry. "I'm just tired is all." "Tired?" Sarah stopped walking and turned to face me, her blue eyes filled with concern that made my chest ache with longing. "Emily, you look like a ghost. You never smile anymore. You never laugh. We used to tell each other everything, and now you act like you barely know me." Best friends. The words hit me like a physical blow. Sarah was everything I wasn't: healthy, happy, loved, protected by parents who would move heaven and earth to keep her safe. Her biggest worry was whether her mother would let her attend the county fair next month. She lived in a world where fathers tucked their daughters into bed with bedtime stories instead of, "I said I'm fine." I repeated, starting to walk again. "Just fine." But Sarah wasn't giving up that easily. She grabbed my arm, and I couldn't help but wince as her fingers touched one of the fresh bruises Coach Harlan had left during Tuesday's training session. "You're not fine," she said firmly. "Emily, my mama always says you can tell when someone's carrying a heavy burden just by looking in their eyes. She says secrets have weight, and yours is crushing you." For a moment, I considered telling her everything. The words crowded on my tongue like prisoners fighting to escape, about Coach Harlan, about what he did to me in that shed and his office and the school basement, about the threats that kept me silent even when silence felt like slow death. "Sarah," I began, then stopped. How could I explain something so horrible to a girl who lived in a world of piano lessons and birthday parties? How could I tell her that the man she trusted, the coach who praised her batting stance and called her slugger, was systematically destroying me? "What is it?" she pressed. "Emily, you can tell me anything. We're friends. Real friends trust each other with their deepest secrets." But then I heard Coach Harlan's voice in my memory. "If you tell anyone, I'll destroy you and everyone who tries to help you." His threats weren't just about me, they extended to anyone who interfered with his control over my life and body. "Nothing," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need to get home before Pa gets angry about me being late." Meanwhile, Pa's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic as his suspicions about my parentage grew stronger. Some evenings, he would stare at me across our small kitchen with narrowed eyes, muttering under his breath about how I looked nothing like him or his side of the family. "Margaret," he said one night, swaying drunkenly in the doorway while Ma tried to mend one of my torn dresses. "Look at that girl. Really look at her. She don't have my nose, my eyes, my chin. Hell, she don't even hold her head the same way I do." "Frank, you're drunk," Ma said wearily, not looking up from her sewing. "Go sleep it off before you say something you'll regret." "I ain't too drunk to see what's right in front of my face." Pa shot back, his voice turning dangerous. "That child looks like somebody else entirely. Somebody you knew before you married me, maybe." Ma's hand stilled on the dress, her knuckles going white as she gripped the fabric. For a moment, I thought she might tell him the truth, whatever that truth was. But then she resumed her stitching with forced calm. "Emily is your daughter, Frank, legally and in every way that matters. Now please let me finish this mending in peace." But Pa's drunken instincts, ironically, were leading him toward a truth that would have destroyed our family if he'd pursued it. His suspicions worked in Coach Harlan's favor, creating an atmosphere of tension and mistrust that made it even less likely I would confide in my parents about what was happening to me. The worst part was maintaining the facade during regular practice sessions. When other girls were present, Coach Harlan treated me with professional courtesy that bordered on fatherly concern. He praised my speed when I managed to run without stumbling, offered helpful tips on my batting stance, and even defended me when teammates criticized my declining performance. "Emily's going through some personal difficulties right now," he told the team one day when Jenny Morrison complained about my errors costing us a game. "Real teammates support each other through tough times instead of piling on criticism. That's what separates good teams from championship teams." The hypocrisy made me physically sick. How could he stand there talking about support and teamwork after what he did to me twice a week in private? How could he sleep at night knowing he was systematically destroying a 13-year-old girl who had trusted him completely? But the team money kept coming: $2 for every game. We won sometimes $3 for tournaments in neighboring counties. That money bought medicine for Ma's worsening cough and kept basic food on our table. Without it, we would have been completely destitute, forced to rely on church charity or government assistance that came with questions we couldn't answer. Ma's health continued its steady decline throughout that spring and summer. Her coughing fits lasted longer now sometimes, until she couldn't breathe, and her lips turned blue from lack of oxygen. The blood she coughed into her handkerchief was darker, more frequent, and she'd lost so much weight that her clothes hung on her skeletal frame like burial shrouds. "Oh, Emily," she said one evening in May, "come sit with me on the porch steps." I perched beside her carefully, trying not to jostle her too much. Her hand, when she took mine, felt like bird bones wrapped in tissue paper. "I want you to promise me something," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the evening wind through the wheat fields. "Whatever happens to me, don't let anyone break your spirit. You're stronger than you know, baby girl. Stronger than this place, stronger than poverty, stronger than whatever's been making you so sad and frightened lately." I wanted to tell her everything then about Coach Harlan, about the shed and the office and the basement, about how her precious daughter was being destroyed piece by piece while she lay dying and helpless to protect me. But the words stuck in my throat like broken glass. "I promise, Ma," I said instead, squeezing her fragile hand. "I promise I'll be strong." But I didn't feel strong. I felt like I was dissolving, becoming transparent, disappearing into nothing, while everyone around me pretended not to notice. And the worst part was knowing that Ma's promise, her belief in my hidden strength, might be the only thing standing between me and complete surrender to the darkness that was swallowing me alive. The summer of 1957 brought a heat wave that cracked the earth into puzzle pieces and killed what little remained of our neighbors' livestock. But the weather was nothing compared to the escalating hell my life had become under Coach Harlan's increasingly bold abuse. The fourth assault took place during a team trip to Hutchinson, where we were scheduled to play against their championship squad. Coach Harlan had arranged for me to have a private room while the other girls shared accommodations, claiming I needed quiet space to recover from a recent bout with what he told everyone was nervous exhaustion. "Emily's been pushing herself too hard," he explained to the team as we checked into the rundown motel on the outskirts of town. "Champions know when to rest their minds as well as their bodies. She needs isolation to prepare mentally for tomorrow's big game." Sarah looked puzzled by this explanation since my recent performance had been anything but championship level. But she trusted Coach Harlan's judgment the way all of us had been taught to trust adult authority figures. That night, in the musty motel room with its sagging bed and water-stained walls, Coach Harlan spent 4 hours showing me what he called advanced team bonding techniques. This assault was different from the others, more calculated, more deliberately cruel. He brought a camera and took photographs explaining that champions needed to document their training methods for future reference. "You're embarrassing me on the field," he said afterward while I curled on the bathroom floor trying to stop the bleeding. "Making me look like a failure as a coach. Other adults in this county are starting to question my methods when they see how badly you're playing." "I'm trying," I whispered through swollen lips. "I'm trying as hard as I can." "Not hard enough," he replied coldly. "But don't worry. I have ways of motivating players who aren't living up to their potential. Ways that work much better than simple encouragement." The photographs became a new form of control. He showed me Polaroid images of myself in compromising positions, explaining how easily they could be distributed around our small town if I ever decided to stop cooperating with his training program. "Imagine if your classmates saw these," he said casually, fanning the pictures like playing cards. "Imagine what they'd think of sweet little Emily Walsh. Imagine what your dying mother would think if she knew what her precious daughter had become." When we returned home, I discovered that Ma's condition had worsened dramatically during my absence. She'd collapsed while I was gone, and Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring farm had found her unconscious on our kitchen floor, blood pooled beneath her face. "Doc Peterson came by yesterday," Mrs. Henderson told me, her weathered face creased with sympathy. "He says her lungs are too damaged now. Says there's not much anyone can do except keep her comfortable and pray for the Lord's mercy." Pa was nowhere to be found, of course. He'd disappeared into Murphy's Tavern the moment he heard words like dying and comfortable, abandoning me to care for Ma alone during what everyone knew were her final weeks. For the next month, I lived a double life more horrifying than any nightmare. By day, I nursed Ma through her final illness, changing her blood-soaked handkerchiefs, spooning broth between her cracked lips, when she could manage to swallow reading to her from her old Bible when pain kept her awake through the long Kansas nights. By evening, I had to endure Coach Harlan's escalating violence in whatever location he chose for that day's training session. The fifth assault happened in his pickup truck parked behind the grain elevator during a thunderstorm that flooded half the county roads. He'd driven me there after practice, claiming we needed to discuss my attitude problems in private. The storm provided perfect cover. No one would think to look for us, and the sound of thunder drowned out anything else that might be heard. This time, he brought rope and showed me what he called advanced restraint techniques that championship athletes use to build mental toughness. He tied my hands to the truck's door handles and explained that learning to overcome physical limitations was crucial for athletic success. Champions don't give up when things get difficult. He said, his voice eerily calm despite what he was doing to my 13-year-old body. They learn to endure whatever is necessary to achieve their goals. The sixth assault was the worst yet. He took me to the abandoned Hartley farmhouse 3 miles outside town, where old man Hartley had lived alone until his death the previous winter. The house was empty now, scheduled for demolition, which meant we could make as much noise as necessary without worrying about neighbors. He'd brought supplies, a mattress, bottled water sandwiches, and what he called specialized training equipment that included items I'd never seen before and couldn't have named if asked. The assault lasted 6 hours from sunset until well past midnight, with multiple sessions separated by what he called recovery periods, where he lectured me about the importance of dedication to one's sport. "This is what Olympic athletes go through," he explained during one of these breaks while I lay bleeding and semi-conscious on the dirty mattress. "They sacrifice their comfort, their normal childhood experiences, everything that ordinary people think is important. That's why they become champions while others remain losers." When he finally drove me home near dawn, I could barely walk. He had to carry me to our front porch, explaining to Mrs. Henderson, who was tending to Ma during her final hours, that I'd suffered a training accident that required bed rest and careful monitoring. "Dedication like Emily's sometimes leads to overexertion," he told Mrs. Henderson with perfect sincerity. "She pushed herself too hard during advanced drills and needs time to recover. I'll check on her progress personally over the next few days." Ma died 2 days later on a Thursday morning in September, while I held her hand and tried to explain why I looked like someone had beaten me with baseball bats. Her last words were a whispered apology that cut through my heart like razor wire. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better, baby girl. I know someone's been hurting you, and I'm sorry I was too weak and sick to help. Promise me you'll find a way to be strong without me." But she couldn't have known the full extent of what she was apologizing for. I'd never told her about Coach Harlan's systematic destruction of my body, and soul never breathed a word about the weekly horror that had consumed my life. As far as Ma knew, her greatest failure was not being able to provide better food, better clothes, better opportunities for her only child. The funeral was a sparse, heartbreaking affair. A handful of neighbors who felt obligated to attend Reverend Matthews delivering generic prayers for a woman he'd never really known, and Pa showing up drunk and nearly falling into the open grave during the service. Coach Harlan attended standing at the back of the small crowd, with what appeared to be genuine sorrow etched on his face. After the service, he approached me with condolences that made my skin crawl with their false sincerity. "I'm deeply sorry for your loss, Emily," he said, placing his massive hand on my shoulder in full view of the other mourners. "Your mother was a good Christian woman who loved you very much. I know she wouldn't want you to neglect your athletic development during this difficult time of grief." Even at my mother's funeral, surrounded by people who knew and respected him, he was threatening me, reminding me that my grief didn't excuse me from his requirements, his needs, his complete ownership of my body and future. With Ma gone, I was more vulnerable than ever before. Pa made it clear that he considered me nothing but a financial burden now that we'd lost Ma's small disability payments from the government. Most nights, he passed out at Murphy's Tavern, leaving me alone in our increasingly dilapidated house. Coach Harlan took full advantage of this isolation. His training sessions became more frequent, more violent, more carefully designed to break whatever spirit I had left. He'd perfected the art of causing maximum psychological damage while leaving minimal physical evidence that might raise questions from adults who didn't know what to look for. By October, I'd stopped eating almost entirely. Food tasted like ash in my mouth, and my stomach rejected most of what I tried to force down. My weight dropped below 70 pounds, and my uniform hung on me like fabric draped over a skeleton. But somewhere deep inside, buried beneath layers of trauma and terror, Ma's voice whispered the promise I'd made to her. Find a way to be strong without me. I didn't feel strong. I felt like I was dying by inches, disappearing into nothingness, while everyone around me pretended not to notice. But maybe if I could just survive long enough, I might find a way to honor Ma's faith in me. I just didn't know that the key to my survival was hidden in Ma's old trunk, waiting to reveal a truth that would change everything I thought I knew about my life. The revelation that destroyed my understanding of everything came in November 1957, 4 months after Ma's funeral, while I was cleaning out the last of her belongings from our increasingly ramshackle house. Pa had been on a 2-week drinking binge that left him unconscious more often than awake, which meant I could search through Ma's possessions without fear of his violent interference. In the bottom of her old cedar chest, beneath threadbare quilts that had belonged to her mother and faded photographs from happier times, I found a rusted metal box I'd never seen before. The small padlock had long since corroded away in the Kansas humidity, and inside, I discovered a collection that would shatter my world completely. Love letters, dozens of them tied with a blue ribbon that had once been bright but was now faded to the color of winter sky. They were postmarked from various Army bases across the Pacific between 1942 and 1945, written in handwriting I recognized immediately from practice schedules and report cards. The signature on every letter made my hands shake uncontrollably. All my love, forever, Tommy. Thomas, Tommy, Harlan. Coach, Harlan. My dearest Margaret, read the first letter dated June 1942. Boot camp is harder than anything I imagined, but thinking of you gets me through every miserable day. When this war is over, we're going to have the most beautiful life together. I can already picture our children running through wheat fields, just like we used to do when we were kids ourselves. Another letter dated 8 months later was filled with passionate promises that made my stomach churn. Margaret, darling, I dream about you every night. Dream about coming home and making you my wife, about building a house on the land my father promised to give us when I return. We'll fill it with children and laughter and all the love this cruel world can hold. You are my anchor in this storm of war. But it was a letter dated February 1944, 1 month before I was born, that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. My beloved Margaret, I received your letter about the baby, and I won't lie to you, I'm scared as hell. But I'm also more excited than I've ever been about anything in my life. When I get home, we'll get married immediately and make everything proper. Our child will have a father who loves both of you more than life itself. Tell our baby that Daddy is fighting to come home to him or her. The final letter in the bundle dated March 1944. The month I was born was devastating in its coldness and cruelty. Margaret, I've had considerable time to think about this situation, and I've come to the conclusion that marriage would be a serious mistake for both of us. We were young and got carried away by wartime emotions and physical attraction that we mistook for something deeper. Now that I'm preparing to return to civilian life, I have opportunities opening up that I can't afford to compromise for what was essentially a moment of weakness. Find someone else to claim the child as his own. I won't be returning to claim what was never really mine in the first place. Do not contact me again. Thomas Harlan. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in oiled cloth to protect it from moisture and time, I found my birth certificate, the document I'd never been allowed to see, the one that made Pa's face turn purple with rage whenever anyone mentioned official papers. Father Thomas Franklin, Harlan mother, Margaret Rose Walsh, date of birth, March 15, 1944, place of birth, Franklin County General Hospital, not Pa. Not the man who had beaten me, starved me, made my childhood a daily misery of violence and neglect. Thomas Harlan. Coach Harlan was my biological father. The final piece of evidence was Ma's diary, a small, leather-bound book that had been hidden beneath the other documents. Her entries from 1944 painted a picture of devastating betrayal and desperate survival. March 20th, 1944. Tommy's letter came today. I read it 10 times before I could believe what he was saying. He's abandoning us, me and his baby daughter. I don't know what I'm going to do. How will I survive as an unmarried mother in a town where everyone knows everyone else's business? March 25, 1944. Frank Walsh asked me to marry him today. He's not a perfect man. He drinks too much and has a terrible temper when he's been drinking, but he says he'll claim Emily as his own blood and no one in town will ever know the truth about her real parentage. I said yes. What other choice do I have? I can't raise a child alone with no money and no family support. April 2nd, 1944. Married Frank today in a simple ceremony at the courthouse. He was already half drunk at 10 in the morning, but he signed all the legal papers making Emily officially his daughter. Maybe someday I can forget that her real father was a coward who chose his reputation over his own flesh and blood. The diary entries continued sporadically over the years, documenting Pa's growing resentment toward me as I aged and began to resemble my biological father more clearly. June 12, 1950. Frank accused me again today of adultery of having Emily with another man during the war. He's getting more suspicious about why she looks nothing like him and everything like her real father. I'm terrified he'll figure out the truth someday. What would he do to Emily if he knew she wasn't really his daughter? The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before Ma's death. September 1st, 1957. Emily's been acting so strange and frightened lately. Withdrawn, jumpy, like she's carrying some terrible secret that's eating her alive from the inside. I wish I could help her, but I'm too sick now, too weak to be the mother she needs. Sometimes I wonder if someone is hurting my baby girl the way her father hurt me all those years ago by abandoning us. But who would believe a poor, sick woman's suspicions? Who would care enough about a girl like Emily to investigate and help her? The diary slipped from my numb fingers as the full horror of my situation became crystal clear. Coach Harlan knew exactly who I was. He had known from the very first day I joined his team that I was the daughter he'd abandoned, the mistake he'd refused to claim as his own blood. Every assault, every degradation, every moment of calculated torture had been deliberate revenge against Ma for daring to ask him to take responsibility for his actions 13 years earlier. He was punishing me, his own biological daughter, for the unforgivable sin of existing, of being living proof of his cowardice and selfishness. But it was worse than simple revenge. This was patricide of the soul, a father systematically murdering his own daughter's spirit piece by bloody piece while pretending to be her mentor and protector. I sat on Ma's old bed, surrounded by the evidence of this unspeakable betrayal, and felt something crack open inside my chest. Not break, I was already broken beyond any hope of complete repair, but crack open like a seed that had been buried too long in dark soil, finally ready to push toward whatever light might be available. For the first time in over a year, I felt something other than fear and despair coursing through my veins. I felt rage, pure, clean, righteous fury at the man who had taken everything from me, my innocence, my childhood, my mother's happiness, my sense of safety in the world. Tommy Harlan thought he had destroyed me completely, reduced me to nothing more than a broken doll that existed solely for his amusement and revenge. But he had made one crucial mistake in his campaign of destruction. He had given me a reason to fight back that was stronger than my fear of him. He had shown me that I was not responsible for what he was doing to me. I was not being punished for my own sins or failures. I was being punished for his failures, his cowardice, his inability to take responsibility for the consequences of his own choices. And that knowledge, horrible as it was, began to transform my terror into something infinitely more dangerous to him. It began to transform my terror into determination. Following my devastating discovery of the truth about my parentage, the winter of 1957-58 became the darkest period of my young life. Armed with the knowledge that Coach Harlan was my biological father, I felt the weight of his betrayal crushing down on me, like a mine shaft collapse, burying whatever hope I'd managed to preserve under tons of poisonous truth. But knowledge, I was learning, could be as dangerous as ignorance. Now that I understood the full extent of his revenge against Coach Harlan's abuse, took on new dimensions of calculated cruelty. He seemed to sense that something had changed in me, that I was carrying new information that made me potentially more dangerous to him. His response was to escalate the violence while simultaneously destroying anyone who might be positioned to help me. The first victim of this escalation was Sarah Mitchell, my teammate, and the closest thing I had to a best friend. Sarah had noticed my continued decline over the months, my increasing withdrawal, my inability to concentrate during games, the way I flinched at unexpected sounds or touches. "Emily Walsh," she said one December morning after Sunday church services. "I need to talk to you, and I'm not taking no for an answer this time." She steered me away from the crowd of families exchanging holiday pleasantries and led me to the small cemetery behind the church, where weathered headstones marked 3 generations of farmers and their families. "Sit down," she commanded, pointing to the stone bench dedicated to our town's war dead. "Man, don't you dare tell me you're fine, because we both know that's a lie." Sarah paced in front of me, her breath forming white clouds in the frigid air, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by something I'd never seen in her before, adult determination mixed with teenage fury. "You look like you're dying," she said bluntly. "You've lost so much weight that your clothes hang on you like scarecrow rags. You never smile anymore, never laugh, never act like anything in this world brings you joy." "Emily, we've been friends since we were little kids, learning to tie our shoes. I know something terrible is happening to you." For a moment, I considered telling her everything about Coach Harlan, about the weekly horror in various locations around town, about the devastating truth I'd discovered in Ma's trunk. Sarah was strong, brave, from a stable family with money and community influence. Maybe she could find a way to help me that I couldn't see. "Sarah," I began, then stopped. How could I explain that our respected coach, the man her parents trusted with their daughter's athletic development, was systematically destroying me? How could I tell her that he was my biological father, taking revenge on a dead woman by torturing her child? "What is it?" she pressed, sitting beside me on the cold stone bench. "Emily, you can tell me anything. We're friends. Real friends protect each other." So I told her a carefully edited version of the truth, not about Coach Harlan's identity as my father, not about the specific nature of his abuse, but about someone connected to the team hurting me in ways I couldn't fully describe. "Someone's been hurting me," I said carefully, watching her face for signs of disbelief or disgust. "Someone with power over whether I stay on the team or not. Someone who could destroy my family if I spoke up about what he's doing." Sarah's eyes went wide with understanding and fury. She was smart enough to read between the lines, brave enough to reach the obvious conclusion. "Are you talking about Coach Harlan?" she asked quietly. I couldn't bring myself to say his name aloud, but my silence was answer enough for someone who'd known me as long as Sarah had. "That monster!" She breathed, her hands clenching into fists. "Emily, you have to tell someone in authority. Your pa, the sheriff, the school principal, someone who can make him stop." "No!" I grabbed her arm desperately. "You can't tell anyone what I just said. Promise me, Sarah. Promise me you won't say anything to anybody about this conversation." "But Emily, if he's hurting you?" "Promise me." The desperation in my voice must have convinced her, because she reluctantly nodded, but I could see in her eyes that she wasn't going to let this rest. Sarah Mitchell had been raised by parents who taught her that good people stand up to evil, that silence in the face of injustice makes you complicit in the crime. 3 days later, she approached Coach Harlan directly. I didn't know about the confrontation until afterward, but Sarah had waited until after regular practice to speak with him privately. She'd chosen her words carefully, not making direct accusations, but expressing concern about his special attention toward certain team members. "Coach Harlan," she'd said according to what she told me later, "I've been watching Emily lately, and I'm worried that maybe all this extra training you're giving her might be harmful somehow. She seems to be getting worse instead of better, more frightened instead of more confident." Coach Harlan's response, she said, had been calm and measured the perfect performance of a concerned adult addressing a teenager's misguided concerns. "That's a very thoughtful observation, Sarah," he'd replied. "Emily is going through some difficult personal adjustments since her mother's death. Sometimes intensive training can seem overwhelming to girls who aren't accustomed to pushing their physical and mental limits, but champions are made through challenges that ordinary athletes can't handle. I just think maybe she needs less individual attention and more time with the team as a whole," Sarah had pressed. "You know, more support from her teammates during this hard time in her life." "I appreciate your concern for your teammate," Coach Harlan had said, his voice carrying a subtle warning that Sarah was too inexperienced to recognize. "But perhaps you should focus on your own athletic development instead of trying to manage other people's training programs. Team chemistry depends on everyone staying in their assigned roles." Sarah's destruction began the very next day. Anonymous phone calls were made to her parents reporting that their daughter had been seen drinking alcohol with high school boys behind the grain elevator. Letters appeared in her school locker supposedly from boys describing intimate encounters that had never happened. Whispers followed her through the hallways at school, cruel suggestions that Sarah Mitchell, the preacher's star pupil, was pregnant and trying to hide it by deflecting attention onto other people's problems. The rumors spread through our town of 800 people, like wildfire through drought-dried wheat. At church on Sunday, adults shook their heads sadly when they saw Sarah whispering about how good families could still produce bad children if parents didn't maintain proper supervision. Even her own parents began watching her with suspicious, disappointed eyes. Her father, a deacon at our church, and a man who'd never had reason to doubt his daughter's character, started asking pointed questions about her after-school activities. "Sarah," I heard him say one evening when I was walking past their house, "your mother and I have been hearing some disturbing reports about your behavior lately. We need to have a serious conversation about the importance of maintaining our family's reputation in this community." 2 weeks later, Sarah approached me after school with tears streaming down her face and desperation in her voice. "Emily, these lies are destroying my life," she said, grabbing my hands in hers. "I don't understand where they're coming from or why people are so willing to believe terrible things about me without any proof." I knew exactly where the lies were coming from, but I couldn't tell her. Coach Harlan's message was crystal clear. "This is what happens to people who try to interfere with my relationship with Emily Walsh. Maybe you should have minded your own business," I said, hating myself for the cruelty, but knowing it was the only way to protect her from even worse consequences. Sarah stared at me like I'd struck her across the face with a baseball bat. "How can you say that to me?" she whispered. "I was trying to help you because I care about you. I was trying to protect you from someone who's hurting you." "Well, don't," I snapped, forcing myself to meet her hurt, confused gaze. "I don't need your help, and I don't need your protection. Just leave me alone and worry about your own problems." The devastation on Sarah's face was like a physical blow to my heart, but I forced myself to walk away from her. Better that she hate me than suffer the complete destruction that Coach Harlan was capable of orchestrating for anyone who threatened his control over me. Within 6 weeks, the damage to Sarah's reputation was irreparable. Her parents, unable to bear the shame and constant gossip, made the decision to send her away to live with relatives in Colorado. Until the scandal died down, and she could start fresh somewhere else. "I want you to know," she said to me on her last day at school, her voice hollow with defeat. "I'm not pregnant. I never did any of the things people are saying about me. I never even kissed a boy, much less the other things they're claiming. But nobody believes me anymore. Nobody cares about the truth when lies are more interesting." She left town on a February morning so cold that the train tracks cracked from the temperature, and I never saw her again. My only friend, my only ally, my only source of comfort in a world gone mad gone, because she had tried to save me from a monster who turned out to be my own father. That night, alone in our freezing house with Pa passed out drunk on the kitchen floor, I made a decision that felt like signing my own death warrant. I was going to find a way to destroy Thomas Harlan, even if it destroyed me in the process. I just didn't know that the opportunity would come sooner than I expected during a spring storm that would change everything forever. The final confrontation erupted in April 1958, on a day when the Kansas sky turned the sickly green color that every prairie dweller recognized as nature's warning of approaching violence. I was 14 years old, weighing barely 70 pounds, and carrying secrets that felt heavier than my entire emaciated body. The plan had been forming in my mind for weeks, not a sophisticated strategy, because I was still just a terrorized child, but a desperate determination to force the truth into the open before Coach Harlan's systematic destruction of my soul was finally complete. The opportunity came during a severe storm warning that had sent most of the town scrambling for basements and storm cellars. Tornado sirens were already wailing across the county when Coach Harlan left word at the school office for me to meet him at the field to secure equipment before the weather hit. Of course he had. One final private session before nature provided the perfect cover for whatever he planned to do to me. I walked to the school grounds through air so thick and oppressive it felt like breathing underwater. The sky was an unnatural shade of green-black, and the wind carried that electric smell that made every animal for miles around seek shelter instinctively. But I wasn't seeking shelter. I was walking toward the most dangerous confrontation of my life, armed with nothing but Ma's letters and a desperate hope that the truth might somehow set me free. Coach Harlan was waiting by the equipment shed, his massive frame silhouetted against the approaching storm clouds. Lightning flickered in the distance, and the first drops of rain were beginning to fall. "Emily!" he called out, his voice carrying false cheer over the rising wind. "Glad you got my message. We need to get this gear properly stored before this storm tears everything apart." But I didn't walk toward that concrete prison where he'd destroyed my childhood piece by piece. Instead, I stopped 20 feet away and reached into my jacket pocket, pulling out the bundle of letters and the birth certificate that had shattered my world 6 months earlier. "I know who you are," I said, my voice carrying clearly despite the wind. "What's that?" He cupped his ear theatrically. "You'll have to speak up, Emily. This weather is getting pretty fierce." "I said I know who you are," I shouted, holding up the documents like shields against his lies. "I know you're my father, Tommy. I know you abandoned me and Ma, and I know why you've been hurting me." For the first time since I'd known him, Thomas Harlan looked genuinely shocked. His practiced expression of paternal concern melted, completely replaced by something that looked almost like fear, or perhaps the recognition that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. "Where did you get those papers?" he demanded, his voice dropping to the dangerous growl I'd heard too many times in private. "Ma kept everything," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Every letter you wrote her during the war, every promise you made and broke. And this." I held up the birth certificate. "Legal proof that you abandoned your own daughter and then spent 4 years torturing her for revenge." The first phase of our final confrontation began when he lunged at me with surprising speed for such a large man. But months of abuse had taught me to read his movements, and desperation gave me reflexes I didn't know I possessed. I dodged his grasping hands and ran toward the baseball diamond, the precious documents clutched tightly against my chest. "Give me those goddamn papers right now," he roared, pursuing me across the muddy field as lightning flashed overhead. "Those are private family business that you have no right to." "Family business," I screamed back, spinning to face him near the pitcher's mound, where I'd once dreamed of playing in real games. "Is that what you call rape? Is that what you call torturing your own daughter for 4 years?" His face twisted with a combination of rage and something that might have been guilt, the first human emotion I'd ever seen him display during our nightmare relationship. "Your mother was a stupid farm girl who thought a wartime romance meant something permanent," he snarled, still advancing toward me through the increasing rain. "She got exactly what she deserved for being naive enough to believe pretty words from a soldier." "And what did I deserve?" The words tore out of my throat like broken glass, carrying 4 years of pain and terror and desperate confusion. "What did your own daughter deserve, Tommy? What did I do to earn what you've been doing to me twice a week for 4 years?" The sound of his first name coming from my lips seemed to enrage him beyond all rational thought. He charged at me again, and this time I wasn't quick enough to escape completely. His massive hand caught my wrist, his fingers grinding the delicate bones until white-hot pain shot up my arm. "You want to know what you deserved," he said, his breath hot against my face despite the cold rain. "You want the whole truth, little girl? Your precious saint of a mother came crawling back to me 3 times after you were born, said she'd do anything at all for money to buy you food and medicine. So I gave her exactly what she was willing to trade for." The revelation hit me like lightning striking my soul. He hadn't just abandoned Ma when she was pregnant. He had continued to abuse her over the years, using our desperate poverty as leverage to force her into the same degradation he'd inflicted on me. "You're lying," I whispered. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew he was telling the truth. It explained Ma's increasing withdrawal over the years, her mysterious periods of illness, the way she sometimes flinched when men spoke to her at church or in town. "Am I—" He laughed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with thunder. "Ask yourself why your mother never reported me, never told anyone what I was doing to you. It's because she knew she was just as guilty, just as dirty, just as worthless as you turned out to be." Something inside me exploded at those words, not broke because I was already broken beyond any hope of complete repair, but exploded like dynamite that had been compressed under pressure for too long. All the fear, all the shame, all the careful survival instincts I'd developed over 4 years of systematic abuse, gone in an instant, replaced by a fury so pure and righteous, it felt like swallowing fire. I bit down on his hand as hard as I could, my teeth breaking through skin and drawing blood that mixed with the rainwater on his flesh. He yelped in surprise, and pain releasing my wrist, and I broke free, running toward the school building with the storm wind whipping my hair across my face like a battle flag. The second phase began as the tornado sirens reached their highest, most urgent pitch, and marble-sized hailstones began pelting the ground around us with increasing violence. Coach Harlan had recovered from his shock and was chasing me in deadly earnest, now his longer legs eating up the distance between us with every stride. I reached the school building and yanked desperately on the door handles, but they were locked tight. The janitor had secured everything before going home to ride out the storm with his own family. Trapped against the brick wall, with nowhere left to run, I turned to face my biological father, with the birth certificate still clutched in my bloodied hands. "Nowhere to go now, you little bitch," he panted, advancing on me through the pelting hail, with murder glittering in his eyes. "Give me those papers right now, and maybe I'll make this quick instead of drawing it out the way I usually do." "No." I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the terror flooding my veins. I'm done running from you. I'm done being afraid of what you'll do to me. That's when I heard them voices calling my name through the howling wind, flashlight beams cutting through the green-tinged darkness like searchlights piercing fog. Through the supernatural gloom of the approaching tornado, I saw figures running toward us across the school grounds. Jenny Morrison, our 15-year-old team captain, was leading a group of girls through the storm. Behind her came Katie Wilson, Linda Hayes, Beth Sanders, and even quiet little Susan Clark, who rarely spoke above a whisper during normal circumstances. "Emily!" Jenny shouted over the wind and hail. "We saw you heading toward the school building. You need to get to the storm shelter immediately." Coach Harlan spun around his face, a mask of fury at this unexpected interruption of his final revenge against me. "Girls, get back to your homes right now!" he bellowed in his most authoritative voice. "This is extremely dangerous weather. You have no business being out here." But something about the scene, me pressed against the school wall, like a trapped animal, him looming over me with obvious violent intent, the official papers scattered at my feet, made Jenny step closer instead of retreating to safety. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice carrying more authority than many adults I knew. "Emily, are you all right? Why are you both out here in this storm?" This was it, the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for since the day I first walked into that equipment shed 4 years earlier. The choice between continued silence and the slim possibility of salvation through truth. I looked at Jenny Morrison, tall, strong, confident, everything I'd once hoped to become, before Coach Harlan destroyed those dreams. I looked at the other girls' teammates who'd watched me decline over the past 2 years without understanding why. Good girls from decent families who still believed that adults could be trusted, that authority figures were worthy of respect and obedience. "He's been hurting me," I said clearly, my voice cutting through the storm like a blade. "For 4 years, since I was 11 years old. He's my father, and he's been making me pay for things that weren't my fault. Things connected to my mother, who's no longer here." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Jenny's face went dead white with shock, then blazing red with a protective fury that made her look like an avenging angel. Katie let out a stream of words that would have scandalized her Baptist minister father. Linda and Beth stepped forward without hesitation, forming a semicircle around me like a human shield against any further harm. "You absolute monster," Jenny declared at Coach Harlan, her flashlight beam cutting across his face like a spotlight of truth. We all knew something was wrong with Emily, but this Jesus Christ, how could you do this to your own daughter? "She's lying," Coach Harlan said, but his voice lacked its usual confident authority. "She's a disturbed girl from a broken family making up fantasies for attention. You can't believe the delusions of a mentally unstable child." "Look at her," Katie interrupted, pointing at my skeletal frame and the bruises visible on my arms where my sleeves had been torn by hail. "Look at what you've done to her. She's been dying right in front of our eyes for 2 years, and we were too stupid or scared to understand why." "I believe her," Linda said firmly, her voice carrying absolute conviction. "Every word. You're a monster, Coach Harlan. A monster who deserves to rot in hell for what you've done." Nia. The third and final phase of the confrontation began when a massive lightning bolt struck the old oak tree beside the equipment shed, splitting it down the middle and sending a shower of sparks into the air. In the sudden, brilliant flash that lit up the entire field like daylight, Coach Harlan made his final, desperate decision. He lunged, not for me, but for Jenny, clearly intending to use her as a hostage to force the other girls' silence about what they'd witnessed. But Jenny Morrison was a farmer's daughter, strong and quick from years of hard physical work, and she wasn't about to become anyone's victim. She swung her heavy metal flashlight like a war club, catching him across the temple and sending him staggering backward. with blood streaming down his face. The other girls rushed to help, and suddenly it was 6 furious teenage girls against one adult man, and for the first time in 4 years, the balance of power had shifted decisively in my favor. "Run, Emily!" Jenny shouted over the storm. "Get to the school shelter." But I didn't run. For the first time since that horrible day in the equipment shed, I felt the incredible strength that comes from having allies, from knowing that other people believed my truth and were willing to fight for me. Instead of fleeing to safety, I picked up a chunk of broken brick from the school's crumbling foundation and held it like a weapon, ready to use it if Coach Harlan came at me or my defenders again. "I'm not running anymore," I declared, my voice carrying over the wind and thunder. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, and I'm never going to be your victim again." Coach Harlan, bleeding from Jenny's blow and surrounded by hostile witnesses who would never again see him as anything but a monster, finally understood that his power over me was shattered beyond any hope of repair. He looked at the birth certificate lying muddy and torn at my feet, then at the circle of teenage girls who had become my protectors. "This isn't over," he said, backing toward the parking lot where his truck waited through the driving rain. "You have no idea what you've started here, what kind of consequences this will bring down on all of you." "Yes, I do," I replied, feeling stronger than I had in 4 years. "I've ended it. It's finally over, and you're never going to hurt me or anyone else again." As he retreated into the storm like the coward he'd always been, Jenny put her arm around my shoulders, the first gentle protective touch I'd experienced from another human being since Ma died. "We're going to help you," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around us. "We're going to make sure this bastard pays for what he's done to you, and we're going to make sure you're safe from now on." Lightning illuminated the baseball field, where I'd lost my innocence, the equipment shed where my childhood had died, the school where I'd pretended everything was normal while bleeding internally for 4 years. But for the first time since I was 11 years old, I wasn't looking at these places with fear and shame. I was looking at them with hope, surrounded by allies who had chosen to believe me, when believing meant risking everything they'd been taught about respecting adult authority. The storm was far from over, but for me, the nightmare was finally beginning to end. The aftermath of that storm-swept confrontation unfolded like the methodical process of rebuilding after a tornado, assessing damage, salvaging what could be saved, and constructing something new and stronger from the wreckage of what came before. Jenny Morrison and the other girls proved to be more than just fair-weather allies. They became my advocates, my protectors and my witnesses in the difficult weeks that followed our confrontation with Coach Harlan. True to their word spoken in the storm, they refused to let his crimes remain hidden in darkness. Jenny's father, Robert Morrison, was a respected wheat farmer and deacon at the First Baptist Church, a man whose word carried significant weight in our small community. When Jenny brought me home that night, soaking wet from rain and shaking from more than just the cold, she told him everything we'd revealed during those terrifying minutes in the storm. "Emily," Mr. Morrison said gently after listening to the full story, while his wife wrapped me in warm quilts by their kitchen stove, "what that man did to you was evil in the purest sense of that word, and I want you to understand something very clearly. It wasn't your fault. Not any of it. Not one single thing. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," I whispered, still hardly able to believe that adults were listening to me, believing me, treating me like someone whose pain mattered. "Now, I need to ask you something difficult." He continued, his voice gentle but serious. "Are you willing to tell this story to the proper authorities, to Sheriff Daniels, and maybe a judge if it comes to that? It won't be easy. There will be people who don't want to believe such terrible things about someone they respected. But it's the only way to make sure Coach Harlan can never hurt you or any other child again." I looked around at the Morrison family's kitchen, clean, warm, filled with the smell of fresh bread and coffee, everything my home had never been. These people were offering me something I'd never experienced before: safety and support from adults who actually meant what they said about protecting children. "Yes, sir," I said with more strength than I'd felt in years. "I'll tell them everything, every detail, no matter how hard it is to say out loud." The investigation moved swiftly once it began in earnest. Sheriff Tom Daniels, a man I'd always feared because Pa was arrested so often for public drunkenness and disturbing the peace, turned out to be surprisingly gentle and thorough when dealing with child victims of serious crimes. "Emily," he said during our first formal interview at the courthouse, "I want you to know right up front that I believe what you're telling me. What Coach Harlan did to you was criminal in every sense of the word, and we're going to make sure he faces full legal consequences for his actions." The medical examination by Dr. Peterson was humiliating, but necessary. 4 years of systematic physical and sexual abuse had left my body scarred in ways that would heal, but never completely disappear. The clinical evidence corroborated every detail of my testimony, providing the kind of objective proof that even skeptical adults couldn't dismiss or explain away. Most importantly, other people began coming forward with their own pieces of the larger puzzle. Mrs. Henderson mentioned seeing Coach Harlan's truck parked outside our house at strange hours when Pa was known to be at Murphy's Tavern. 2 former team members' girls who'd graduated the previous year admitted they'd always felt uncomfortable around Coach Harlan, but hadn't known how to articulate their concerns or hadn't felt safe speaking up. The birth certificate and Ma's love letters provided the final devastating piece of evidence that destroyed any remaining sympathy Coach Harlan might have garnered in the community. Even in our conservative rural area that preferred to handle family problems privately, the revelation that a man had systematically abused his own abandoned daughter was too monstrous to ignore or excuse. Thomas Franklin Harlan was arrested on a Tuesday morning in May 1958, pulled from his breakfast coffee at Murphy's Tavern by Sheriff Daniels and 2 deputies. The news spread through our town of 800 people faster than a prairie fire in August, wind carried from house to house by telephone calls and over-the-fence conversations. "Good riddance to bad rubbish," I heard Mrs. Henderson tell her neighbor the day after his arrest. "That poor child has been suffering right under our noses for years, and none of us were smart enough or brave enough to see it for what it was." But not everyone in town was sympathetic to my situation. Some people, mostly men who drank with Pa at Murphy's Tavern, and women who'd always resented our family's poverty, suggested that I was making up stories for attention or money, that good men were being destroyed by hysterical females who didn't know their proper place in society. Girl that age from that kind of trashy family? I heard one of them mutter outside the grocery store, probably just trying to get money from a lawsuit. These welfare types will say anything if they think it'll pay off. The trial took place in the county courthouse that summer, drawing reporters from newspapers in Wichita and Kansas City, who were fascinated by the sensational nature of the case a respected coach revealed as a child predator, a father abusing his own abandoned daughter, a small town's trusted authority figure exposed as a monster. For 3 sweltering days in July, I sat in the witness chair and told my story to a room full of strangers, my voice growing stronger and clearer each time I spoke the words that had once seemed too dangerous even to think in private. Coach Harlan's defense attorney, an expensive lawyer from Topeka, who specialized in defending wealthy men accused of sex crimes, tried every tactic in his arsenal to discredit my testimony. He painted me as a troubled girl from a broken home, someone prone to fantasy and lies seeking attention and financial gain through false accusations against a respected community leader. "Isn't it true, Miss Walsh," he asked during cross-examination, "that you've always had what teachers would call an active imagination, that you've been known to tell stories that weren't entirely accurate when the truth seemed less interesting?" "No, sir," I replied, calmly meeting his gaze without flinching. "I've been telling the absolute truth about what Coach Harlan did to me, and I have the scars on my body to prove every word of it. The physical evidence, the documents proving his paternity and abandonment, the testimony of my teammates, and the statements from other community members created an unshakable foundation of truth that even the most skillful attorney couldn't demolish through legal tricks and character assassination. When the jury returned their verdict after only 2.5 hours of deliberation, guilty on all counts of child sexual abuse, incest, and statutory rape, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over 4 years: complete legally enforced safety. Thomas Franklin Harlan was sentenced to 25 years in the state penitentiary at Lansing, with no possibility of parole for the first 15 years. As they led him away in shackles and prison clothes, he looked at me one final time. There was no remorse in his eyes, no acknowledgement of the harm he'd inflicted on his own daughter. Only cold calculation and the impotent rage of a predator who'd finally been caged by society. Pa's reaction to learning the complete truth about my parentage was as violent and predictable as a summer thunderstorm. In a whiskey-fueled rage that lasted 5 days, he screamed that he'd wasted 14 years raising another man's bastard and threw my few belongings into the front yard for the whole town to see. "Get out of my house and off my property," he slurred, waving a bottle of corn liquor like a weapon. "I never want to see your lying face again. You ain't my blood, so you ain't my responsibility anymore." But this time, unlike every other crisis in my young life, I had somewhere safe to go. The Morrison family had already offered to let me live with them while I finished high school, and several other families in town had made similar offers. For the first time in my life, I was actively wanted rather than merely tolerated as a burden. I chose to stay with the Morrisons because they treated me like family rather than charity. Mrs. Morrison never made me feel like an object of pity or a burden on their household, and their 3 younger children accepted me as their big sister without question or hesitation. "You're not a victim anymore, Emily," Mrs. Morrison told me one evening as we sat on their front porch, watching fireflies dance above the wheat fields. "You're a survivor, and survivors get to choose what comes next in their lives instead of having choices forced on them by other people." What came next was high school graduation as valedictorian of my class, then college, on a full scholarship that I earned through academic achievement and advocacy work with other abuse survivors, then a career dedicated to helping other children escape the kind of hell I'd endured and survived. Now, at 78 years old, I sit in this comfortable chair by the window of Sunset Manor, watching the same Kansas wheat fields that witnessed both my destruction and my salvation all those decades ago. My hands shake with arthritis as I write these final pages, but my memory remains crystal clear about every detail of the story I've just shared with you. The 64 years that followed my testimony and Coach Harlan's conviction brought their full share of challenges and triumphs, sorrows, and unexpected joys. I graduated from high school as valedictorian, the first person in my family ever to finish school, then earned a scholarship to Kansas State University that I funded partly through speaking engagements about surviving childhood abuse. I married a wonderful man named David Chen, a Chinese-American engineer I met during my junior year, who understood something profound about being an outsider in small-town America. We couldn't have biological children. The physical damage Thomas Harlan had inflicted on my body made pregnancy impossible, but we fostered 21 children over the years, many of them survivors who needed what I'd finally learned to provide unconditional love and absolute safety. My career in social work spanned 4 decades and took me from rural Kansas to urban Chicago to the halls of the state capitol in Topeka, where I testified for stronger child protection laws, mandatory reporting requirements for teachers and coaches, and specialized courts for handling cases involving child victims. Every child I helped felt like a small victory over the monster who'd tried to destroy me, and every predator we put behind bars felt like justice for the girl I'd been. Jenny Morrison remained my closest friend until her death from cancer 10 years ago. She became a teacher herself, married her high school sweetheart, and raised 5 children who all called me Aunt Emily, and never knew why that title meant so much to me. On her deathbed, she reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. "Do you remember what you said that night during the storm?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "When Coach Harlan was backing away toward his truck, and you said, 'I've ended it. It's finally over.'" That was the bravest thing I'd ever heard anyone say. You saved yourself, Emily. You found your own strength when nobody else could give it to you. Pa died in 1963, found frozen in a ditch beside Highway 50 after a brutal December blizzard. I felt no grief at his passing, only a quiet gratitude that his long suffering had finally ended. Despite everything he'd put me through, I understood by then that he'd been broken by his own demons long before he'd ever met Ma damaged, in ways that made love impossible for him to give or receive. Thomas Franklin Harlan served 19 years of his sentence before dying of a massive heart attack in the prison hospital at Lansing. When I received official notification of his death in 1977, I felt nothing, not relief, not satisfaction, not even the closure I'd thought I might experience. He was simply gone, no longer able to hurt anyone, and that was enough. But the story doesn't end there. Last month, as I was sorting through old papers in preparation for donating my files to the Kansas Historical Society's collection on child advocacy, I received an envelope from the law offices of Henderson and Associates in Topeka. Inside was a letter that changed my understanding of everything I thought I knew about the end of my story. "Dear Mrs. Chen, I am writing to inform you that my client Thomas Franklin Harlan passed away at the Kansas State Penitentiary on March 8, 1977. As executor of his estate, I am required to distribute certain items according to his written instructions, which specified that the enclosed materials should be held for 45 years after his death before being sent to you." He provided no explanation for this unusual delay, but his instructions were legally binding, and we have honored them accordingly. Please contact our office if you require any clarification about these materials. The envelope contained a certified check for $67,000 more money than I'd ever seen in one place, along with a letter written in Thomas Harlan's own handwriting during what must have been his final year in prison. "Emily, if you are reading this, then I am finally dead and can no longer cause harm to anyone in this world. I know this letter cannot undo the terrible things I did to you, but there are truths you deserve to know before you finish living your life. Your mother wrote to me many more times than you discovered in that trunk, not just during the war, but for 13 years afterward. She sent photographs of you at every birthday, school reports showing your excellent grades, newspaper clippings when you won spelling bees or made the honor roll. She never asked me for money or marriage or anything for herself, only for me to acknowledge that you were my daughter, to know that you were growing into a remarkable young woman, despite the poverty my abandonment had condemned you to. I destroyed every letter without opening it. I threw away every photograph without looking at your face. I told myself I was protecting my reputation, my future, my right to start over with a clean slate and a respectable wife who didn't know about my past mistakes. But the truth was simpler and more shameful than any of those justifications. I was a coward who couldn't face what I had done. When you joined my team, I knew immediately who you were. You looked exactly like my mother at that age, and you had the same stubborn set to your jaw that I saw in my own mirror every morning. I told myself I would be a good coach to you, that I could somehow make up for abandoning you by helping you succeed in athletics and maybe earn a scholarship to college. Instead, I became the monster you know me to be. Every assault was my self-hatred turned against an innocent child. Every threat was my fear of exposure transformed into cruelty designed to ensure your silence. I destroyed you because I couldn't face what I had done to your mother, and because your very existence reminded me daily of my own moral cowardice. You deserved a father's love and protection. Instead, You received a father's rage at his own failures and weaknesses. I cannot ask for forgiveness. It would be meaningless coming from someone whose crimes are truly unforgivable. But I want you to know that your mother loved you enough to keep trying to build a bridge between us for 13 years, even when I made it clear through my silence that I wanted nothing to do with either of you. The money represents the sale of my family's farm, which should have been your inheritance from birth. Use it however you see fit. You became the person your mother hoped you would be, despite everything I did to prevent it, and that is a victory I never understood until it was far too late to matter. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you to know that the fault was entirely mine, never yours, and that your strength in surviving what I did to you has inspired other victims to find their voices and seek justice. That knowledge has been the only light in the darkness of my prison years. You won, Emily. You survived, and you turned your pain into purpose. You became everything I never had the courage to be. Thomas Franklin Harlan. I sat with that letter for 2 weeks before I knew what to do with it. Then I called Kansas State University and established the Margaret Walsh Memorial Fund for survivors of childhood trauma who want to pursue careers in child advocacy, social work psychology, and law enforcement. The first scholarship recipient will be a 19-year-old woman from western Kansas whose story sounds hauntingly familiar, but who, unlike me, had adults in her life who listened and believed her before irreparable damage was done. As I finish writing these memoirs in the fading light of a Kansas sunset, I understand something about healing that I couldn't have grasped when I was 14 years old and fighting for my life in that storm. Healing doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't shape who you became. It means transforming your pain into purpose, your scars into strength, your survival into service to others who are still fighting their own battles against monsters who wear familiar faces. I will never forgive Thomas Franklin Harlan for what he did to me, to my mother, to the child I was, and the woman I became because of his choices. But I have forgiven the terrified little girl who kept silent for so long, who thought she deserved the abuse, who believed she was worthless and disposable and alone in the world. That girl was wrong about almost everything, except the most important truth of all: she was stronger than she knew. It just took her 7 decades to fully believe it. The wheat fields outside my window are golden with this year's harvest, and somewhere out there, another child who needs to hear these words is finding the courage to speak their truth to someone who will listen and believe and act to protect them. For that child, and for the child I was, I end this story not with bitterness or despair, but with the hardest-won wisdom of my long life. You are not alone. You are not worthless. You are not responsible for what was done to you. You are stronger than you know. And your voice, when you find the courage to use it, has the power to change everything. Trust your voice. Someone is waiting to hear it.